As you've heard, this is the 80th anniversary of the Kindertransport next month in November. And 10,000 children, mainly Jewish, came from Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and some other countries. And I was one of them. And the person who organized the Kindertransport from Prague was Nicky Winton, a man who died at the age of 106, a great man. What you may not know is that although he was a constituent of Theresa May's, he in fact stood as a Labour candidate for Maidenhead District Council in 1954 and 55, and he was great friends with Nye Bevan and other people. So I loved talking to him. He was a great guy and he loved talking politics. But above all, he did something fantastic. He needn't have bothered, and he decided that something had to be done. Other people would have walked away, and he did it. And so I owe my life to him, as do many others. Now, I should just explain that English is my third language. That's my excuse for what you're about to hear now. Early in 2016, Save the Children estimated that there were 95,000 unaccompanied child refugees somewhere in Europe, and that between 5,000 and 10,000 of them had in fact gone missing. So when the immigration bill was coming through the Lords, it seemed a good opportunity to put down an amendment and to establish that we should take some of these children. Then I'll tell you one or two things that happened. I put the amendment down, and the next thing is Theresa May, who was Home Secretary, asked me to go and see her. Well, that's unusual. I'm only a backbench person in the Lords. Anyway, so she said she'd like me to withdraw the amendment. And I said, why? And she said, well, if we take these children, others will follow. And I said, but we can't turn our back on these children, the dire conditions they're living in. It's awful. And anyway, it was no deal. So we left it at that. And then the amendment, it went through the Lords easily. It was then slightly defeated in the Commons. It went back to the Lords with an even bigger majority. Now, something interesting happened at that time, and that is public opinion began to be aware of the issue. One could sense public opinion. I was walking down a street in Hammersmith, and somebody shouted at me. And normally when people shout at politicians, it's abuse. Oh no, keep on with the amendment, she said. So I was much encouraged by the supportive messages, but above all, by the fact that all over the country, support groups were being set up for refugees, to make them welcome. We saw on our television sets a little boy, Alan Kurdi, dying on a Mediterranean beach. And I think public opinion was shocked, and public opinion said we should do something. So Theresa May asked me to go and see her again. It was becoming a habit. She was still Home Secretary. And she looked at me and she said, we propose to accept your amendment. And I said, great. And then another minister told me, he said to me emphatically, we propose to accept the letter and the spirit of the amendment. And it is my contention the government have done no such thing. They've backed off whenever they could. For example, people said to me, how do I feel? I said, I vary between anger and tears about all this. It's bitterly, bitterly disappointing. Anyway, so the government tried to limit the numbers. Originally, the amendment had said 3,000, but for complicated parliamentary reasons, we had to drop the 3,000 figure. Anyway, so the government then said, we propose to limit the numbers to 480. We said, why? Well, they said local authorities can't take any more children in foster places. So we said, well, this is ridiculous. We know lots of local authorities. I could go through a list, Hammersmith, Ealing, Lambeth, all sorts of local authorities who are able and willing to take more children. And we said that to the government. And, it's been a long time since that amendment was passed, and so far we've had about 220 only. I mean, these are derisory numbers, and it is really very disappointing. However, we've got another legal path to safety, and the argument all along has been that if we don't give young people a legal path to safety, then the traffickers will get hold of them, and the traffickers can be dangerous, abusive, and horrible. And the thing is to find legal paths. Now, under a Dublin Treaty, under the EU, there is something called Dublin III, which is basically to do with family reunion, which says essentially that, say, a Syrian boy in France could join an uncle in Sweden. And the campaign on behalf of the ones who didn't have family here under my amendment also became part of the campaign for the others. And so far, under that, we've had about 800. We estimate that there are so far probably 2,000 in Greece eligible and 200 in France. They're eligible, they have the right to come here, and the government is still dragging their heels. And I think it is really very depressing. Now, in the middle of all this, I had the chance to go to Calais, to the jungle twice, and once after it was pulled down. And when I first got to the jungle in Calais, some of you may have been there, some of you will have seen it on the television screens. When I first got there, a bit of the camp had already been cleared. And in this little shopping street there were displays of tear gas canisters and rubber bullets. And I said, what are they for? And the answer was that the French government the then French government had been worried about the National Front in that part of France near Calais. And they decided to move these refugees, many children among them, and they were using tear gas and rubber bullets because they were worried about the National Front being strong in that part of France. To which the only comment can be, you do not defeat the National Front by adopting the policies that they would adopt. And that, of course, is a wider lesson than just for refugees, but it definitely applies there. I then got to Calais again once or twice, and I saw some wonderful, wonderful people working with refugees. You know, there was a woman called Liz Clegg, who was actually a firefighter from Birmingham, who ran a mother and child centre in the middle of the jungle. Tremendous people volunteering, most of them were pretty young, volunteering to help. And I think as a country we should acknowledge that we've got lots of young people who've gone to the refugee camps to work with the most vulnerable of fellow human beings, child refugees, to give everything they can and to do it for virtually no money. I think that's terrific. And then the camp was cleared in Calais, and we made desperate efforts with NGOs to bring as many children over as possible, but it didn't really work, and some of them were dispersed over France, and some of them are still worked their way back to the Channel. Now, in Greece, I also had a chance to go to the camps. The first time I went to the camps in Greece, it was the middle of winter, the temperature was -12, it was bitterly cold, there was no heating. The situation was absolutely desperate. And what can you say to people? What can you say to people where there is no hope for them at all, except to say, well, we'll do our best to persuade the British government to do something? You know, that was about the only hope we could offer. And of course we did. But it was very, very depressing. And just recently, I went to 3 camps, including Moria camp on the island of Lesbos. And there were about 7,000 to 9,000 people in a camp for 2,000. And there was an adjacent camp which was not really a camp at all. These are desperate situations. And what can we say to people? There's no future for you? There's nothing, we've got nothing to offer you as a rich West European country? Surely we can do better than that. Now, so I've worked very hard with Safe Passage and Help Refugees and other NGOs who are doing magnificent work, mobilizing volunteers, as I have said. Now, the government has a small scheme for vulnerable persons, including some vulnerable children, from the region, from Jordan, Lebanon, and so on. And the government scheme was there would be a total of 20,000 over 5 years, or 23,000, I should say, over 5 years. Now, so far, about under half have come. And again, these are people, we've made a commitment, and yet we're not doing it. We're not doing very much about it. And I just think we've got to do better than that, as I shall go on to say in a minute or two. Now, Labour Party policy is pretty good. I want to nudge it a bit further, Jeremy, if you don't mind. I don't know, I'm allowed to make party policy up here. Well, I have to say, in the light of that, I'm going to step it up a bit. God, no, nobody's ever... I didn't know one could do it at a conference, just do it on the hoof. Anyway, there we are. Well, this is great. I'm going to have real fun here. Anyway, so I mean, Labour Party policy is good. We have a commitment that refugees are the victims of war, persecution, famine, and so on. They're entitled to our support. The government a Labour government would continue with the amendment that I moved for unaccompanied child refugees to come here. They will be good on family reunion, and we'll do more for education. Now, we've always been an internationalist party, and Jeremy, you've spent your life being an internationalist. Nobody can... Nobody could deny that. It's well known and acknowledged. Now, I explained some of the commitments that we have as a party, but I've been working with NGOs, and what we'd really like, it's very simple. So modest, I think it's almost not enough. But what we'd like is for a Labour government, I mean, Tory government if they'll do it, but they won't. Is Labour, well, you know, one can be optimistic. Anyway, a Labour government, I think we should make a commitment that 10,000 unaccompanied child refugees should be brought over to Britain from Europe and from the region. I'm being very modest. Over a 5-year period, and you know that is 3 per local authority per year. That's not very much, is it? It's almost too little. You can throw me off the platform for being too modest. Anyway, yeah, more. Well, I agree. More. Jeremy, they say more. Okay. Anyway, it is actually shameful that such modest requests are ones that no British government under the Tories can achieve or is willing to achieve. I think it is shameful, and I think we need to be absolutely resolute. Now, just a little bit more, if I may. I don't say that every unaccompanied child refugee in Europe is the responsibility of the British government. We should play our part, but all European countries should share responsibility. 1 or 2 have done. We're certainly way below what we should be doing, and we should stand firmly and say this is what we're going to do. Now, let's look at the global position. There are 25 million refugees estimated in the world as a whole. There are 40 million displaced persons internally. That's to say people who fled from one part of the country to another who are as vulnerable as refugees, but they don't get international protection. And what is equally alarming is that half that 65 million figure is estimated to be children. Now, they need help, and so we have to speak out on the international stage as well as on the more local European stage. Now, a lot of these people are forgotten. We get a bit of news about what's happening in the Rohingyas in Bangladesh who fled Myanmar. Terrible situation. It's been going on for years. About 20 years ago, I saw about 100,000 who'd fled or been persecuted out of Myanmar, and now the number is 700,000-800,000 or more. It's a desperate situation, and I think we can do better. And of course, for all the refugees in the world, these children, the majority, many of them, millions of them, don't have any education at all. Think of it, young people, no chance of education. So even if eventually they find safety somewhere, and many of these probably won't, it's terrible. They've missed out on education, they've missed out on their whole lives, on their whole futures. So it's absolutely crucial that we support education, both for refugees who arrived here, so they get a good chance to learn English and catch up, but also for refugees the world over. Now, I have just 2 or 3 little asks of you, because you wouldn't want to go away. We were being asked to do something, more to life than a party conference. So look. Let me put it this way: I would vouch that every Labour MP would be pretty good on this and would be very committed. The ones I've talked to, many of them certainly are. But some of you may suffer from MPs from another party, and I think, could you possibly bear to contact your MP, your Tory MP, and ask them to do more for child refugees, to ask them not to have a cap of 480? After all, somebody in their constituencies voted for them, and it is right there should be pressure on them. And in my experience, pressure might just help a bit. Now, what about local councils? Could you also Well, if you're a local councillor, take the message with you and push. Look, if your councillor's doing a good job, pat yourselves on the back, and that's great. If your council is not doing a good job, and I can mention some that aren't, like Wandsworth, for example, I could mention others, but anyway, Wandsworth. Ask your local council what they're doing. Put some pressure on them. Put pressure on them so that they should do more to help all refugees, including child refugees. And that's a big ask, and you're all going to go do it. And more power to your persuasive politics. Look, if you don't like your MP, hold your nose, but go and see them anyway. Right. And finally, can I just say this? I came as an unaccompanied child refugee, and this country and the Labour Party have given me most fantastic of opportunities. I've had real opportunities which I never dreamed would be possible to a refugee coming to Britain at the age of 6. And I would like to feel, well, thank you, I would like to feel that child refugees coming to Britain now, and the more that will follow under Jeremy's government, the child refugees will be made to feel as welcome here and be given the same opportunities that I have.